My name is Mark McAdam, and I am Joint Head of Geography with my colleague.
I'm Ian Perrier, so welcome.
What we're going to do is we're just sort of going to wait for people to join tonight. We've got 7 on the list so far. I'm just going to have to keep kind of leaning forward to sort of see how many people we've got. And we'll look at the questions that are coming in. We'll try and answer everybody's questions appropriately and well, hopefully, and sort of get through that in the time allowed. Now, before we kind of answer anybody's questions, what we're going to do is just give an overview of the course, cover a few things about sort of the course and the kind of fieldwork experiences and work experience opportunities, things like that. So quite a few of the things that we go through, we might have answered many of your questions, but we'll certainly kind of come back to them and sort of look through them and tick them off as we go. So in terms of the course, which I think kind of is the main thing that a lot of people want to know about, it's split up into 2 halves. You've got physical geography and you've got human geography. Now, what I'll do is I'll just sort of talk a little bit about sort of what happens in the first year. I'll talk a little bit about what I teach and what I focus on, and then sort of pass over to Ian, and Ian will sort of say a little bit about what he teaches, and then we'll move on to sort of what we do in second year and so on and so forth. So I sort of start off the year teaching the urban geography in the human section. Now that lasts pretty much most of the year. And it covers things that you'll probably be familiar with from GCSE. That's kind of one of the reasons why we start with the urban geography, because it's probably something that is familiar to you. So there's a nice sort of transition, if you like. We look at sort of global cities, world cities, looking at the process of urbanization and sort of what's happening where around the world in terms of the growth of cities. We look at quite a lot of land use and looking at sort of why different types of land use are located in an urban area and the different factors and processes involved in land use patterns. Social and economic differences and inequalities in urban areas, making comparisons within urban areas like Darlington and Teesside. We also sort of look at microclimates in January, and urban microclimates, and how urban areas have an influence on microclimate. And then we go on to look at environmental issues in urban areas. So looking at waste, water, air pollution, that sort of thing. So that gives you a little bit of a summary of the urban geography. I'll just let you, Ian, have a sort of talk about the coasts.
One of the things just to point out is that we actually teach the coasts and the urban at the same time. And the reason for that is so that it just gives you a little bit of a balance of human and physical geography. So it makes things varied. So basically it's sort of about 2.5 hours a week of each of those 2 topics. So in terms of the coast, I mean, obviously, you know, Britain is an island. We've got a fantastic coastline. It's a really diverse coastline if you think about it. You know, you've got some places which have got really high and spectacular cliffs, and those are coastlines where erosional processes are really dominant. So we look at what is it that shapes those processes, those coasts rather, and what affects those processes and what landforms do we get as a result. So we focus particularly on maybe sort of areas on the south coast, like the Jurassic Coast, because it's a World Heritage Site, and there are some spectacular landforms down there, Lulworth Cove, Durdle Door, and so on. But equally, we also recognize that, you know, probably only 50, 60 miles away, you've got somewhere that is a much lower energy environment. And instead, you've got sort of salt marshes, mud flats. So why is it that we've got such differences in relation to our coasts? Okay. Obviously, our coasts are changing all the time through erosion and through deposition. But in addition to that, they are being transformed as a result of sort of sea level change. And sea level, as you'll be aware of with climate change, is on the rise. And that presents various challenges and potentially threats to the coastline and to the people who live there. And so obviously we want to know about that. And I guess that sort of feeds into the management. So how do we manage the coastlines and the way in which they are under threat at the moment? And we're quite interested in that from a point of view of sort of case studies. We have a look at what's happening, particularly in Bangladesh, which is a very densely populated country, but also at its coast, a very low-lying country in a tropical region with tropical storms that present difficulties as well. So lots of diverse content in coasts. Now, once we finish coasts, we go on to another unit, which is called Changing Places. It's a human geography unit, and it's quite different to the content at GCSE. And it deals very much with what places are like, their characteristics of place, and people's experience of place. So we talk really about how a place actually we define as a space plus meaning. So, you know, where is this particular location, but what's it like for the people who live there? And we have a look at Darlington as a familiar place to many of our students. We work out, what that's actually like, how it's developed over time, what's given it its characteristics, what its population is like, what the economic activities are like here. But then in addition to that, we also want to know sort of what's the meaning of the place for people, and also how is Darlington represented? So people who don't live in the town, what do they think of Darlington? What do they associate with Darlington? And then we contrast that with an unfamiliar place. Now, our unfamiliar place is a location on the far western side of the Lake District, and we actually go over there as part of our field work. So one of the reasons that we do the field work in that location is to give an insight into the character of Wasdale, so that in order to answer exam questions effectively, students have got a sort of personal experience of it as well. Okay. But that also feeds into the coursework, which Mark will say a little bit more about.
Yeah, it's good to see that sort of quite a few questions coming in now, and we'll be able to start sort of answering some of those. One of them is sort of the course weighting. Ian sort of just talked about physical geography, coasts, and I was mentioning urban geography earlier on. The course is split 50-50 between sort of physical geography and human geography, and then the final 20% is sort of made up of coursework. Now, I'll start teaching you the sort of fieldwork and coursework towards the end of the year. So we'll go on our 3-day residential to the Lake District in around about March time. COVID permitting, hopefully that will be all done by then. But yeah, we've spent sort of many years in the Lake District in Wasdale, where we spend 3 days doing lots of different skills and different techniques to practice and prepare you basically for your coursework. And we set that up at the end of the year, get you started, get you thinking about titles and ideas and topic areas, so that you can hopefully sort of spend the summer, part of the summer holiday, going out and collecting your own data over the summer based on the experiences that you've had in the Lake District. But we also have a day in Darlington, in the local area, doing field work in Darlington, looking at some urban-based geography. And we've actually just we did that sort of following sort of guidelines and keeping to sort of the sort of distancing. We did our first field trip yesterday, where students were out and about in town doing some various different bits of data collection. So that's kind of a summary of the first year, sort of moving into the second year.
I think it might be worth just answering this question that's come in, asking, is A-level harder than GCSE in terms of content, or is it more about using different skills? Because I think that's sort of relevant for the first year, really. I mean, Mark mentioned that obviously he starts teaching with the urban content, I start teaching with the coasts content, and some of you may well be thinking that perhaps those are topic areas that sound familiar to you. So how is the A-level different? Well, the content is different to some degree in that, yes, we take concepts obviously further, we look at things in more depth as well. So the reason that we actually start with those 2 units is because students tend to find them more accessible. But then, once we've sort of got everybody in and comfortable, then it means that we can start to bring in some of the skills in those units to sort of illustrate them. And that's really how we sort of make the bridge between sort of between GCSE and A-level. And then in terms of sort of the setup in the first year and how we teach, we've got a question here: will you both teach me, or is it one or the other? What we often do is we'll have some shared classes where perhaps I'll teach the coast, Mark will teach the urban. There are some first year classes where I teach everything, but in the second year we have shared classes throughout. So it's 2.5 hours a week of me, 2.5 hours a week of Mark, which again, we hope just helps to keep things a little bit fresh and sort of, interesting.
Yeah, so sort of 5 hours per subject in total. So 5 hours of geography. And as Ian says there, sort of 2.5 hours each. And that works quite well. Students seem to quite enjoy sort of having 2 different teachers rather than just the one, different personalities sort of playing off each other work quite well. So yeah, I mean, in terms of sort of moving into second year then, again, sort of we'll just talk you through the different units and different sort of options that you do in second year. Now, in terms of myself, I kind of will move on to water and carbon in the second year. So we look at the water and carbon cycles, which you probably will be familiar with from GCSE, but sort of a big focus on things like climate change, okay, and how climate change interacts with both the water and carbon cycles. Really, really important issue for the planet moving forward. We do look at some case studies in the water and carbon. We look at the local drainage basin of the Tees. So we look at sort of flows and transfers and stores of water within the Tees basin, and how human influence is sort of affecting or having an impact on some of those flows and transfers. We also look at a much more larger case study on a global scale, and that is the Amazon rainforest. And I hope you can appreciate that the Amazon rainforest has kind of connections with both water and carbon. You've obviously got the Amazon, the river Amazon, and you've also got the biome of the forest environment, which is really, really important for the carbon cycle as well. So very, very contemporary, very, very topical, and very, very important moving forward. Moving on then, Ian, I'll talk a little bit about hazards, which Ian teaches predominantly in second year.
I mean, hazards is one of the units that often students will come along and say, you know, I've really enjoyed doing natural hazards as part of GCSE. Do we do that at A level? And the answer to that, of course, is, well, yes, we do. So some of the work that we do in hazards will have some familiarity to you, because we look at probably some of the same hazards, but again, in a little bit more detail. So we're interested in volcanic eruptions, what sort of happened in Iceland in 2010 to create such an ash cloud when Eyjafjallajökull erupted, because in actual fact, we wouldn't have expected such an explosive eruption to have come from that plate margin. And yet at the same time, you know, it grounded all the plains across Western Europe for a period of time. So why was that? Why did that behave uncharacteristically? We're interested in earthquakes, of course, and I mean, for many hazards, the pattern is very much the same. What causes a particular hazard? What sort of impacts does it have? And how can we manage those? We look at Haiti, which is perhaps the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, had an earthquake in 2010, rubble in the streets, people living in very basic tent accommodation sort of many years after that. Why? What are the sorts of issues there? Tropical storms we're interested in, and we tend to contrast two of them. Now, what I usually do as I work my way through the different hazards and through the case studies, we prepare ourselves for specific sort of studies of examples, but gradually I provide a little bit less support as the case studies go on, and expect a little bit more by way of independent learning. So I'll scaffold the independent case studies to begin with, but then it's almost, if you like, sort of thinking, well, what are the sorts of skills you'd need to research something when you go off to university? So by the time you moved on to your sort of final case studies, the onus is very much more on you, but you can use the format that I've given you. One hazard that we look at A level that you probably haven't studied at GCSE is wildfires. And wildfires are really topical. You hear an awful lot about them just recently in Australia, of course, but more recently than that in California. And that is, I guess, one of the great things about geography is there's so much geography in the news. You know, every time you sort of turn on the TV, there's something that is relevant there. The last thing I would say really about hazards that makes it different perhaps from GCSE is I always used to feel when I taught GCSE that you would go through and you would deal with each hazard in isolation. Well, okay, fair enough, but that's not how it works for many countries. You know, you've got places like the Philippines. They get earthquakes, they have volcanic eruptions, they also get tropical storms happening. You know, they might even get the odd wildfire as well. So these are sort of multiple hazard locations, and what are the consequences of actually having all of these things going on at once is quite an important part of what we do.
Yeah, the final unit, I have to say I was really impressed with Ian's sort of pronunciation of the Icelandic volcano.
It's not the best.
I can't sort of do to save my life. Right, in terms of the final unit, global systems and global governance. Now, again, another contemporary issue. Global systems is pretty much all about globalization. What is globalization? What are the pros and cons of globalization? Obviously, it's a process and something that really dominates the world that we live in at the moment. But a really, really interesting part of this final unit is global governance, and it wasn't something that I was really interested in sort of when I looked at the specification, but sort of realized once I started teaching it, its importance and how we govern the planet. Now, if you think about the planet, there are some sort of key issues that are going on that cut across boundaries and cut across borders, such as climate change. Sort of how do we manage that? How do we get countries to negotiate and cooperate with each other to try and reduce the impacts and the potential of climate change? We've talked and mentioned earlier on about sort of the Amazon rainforest. The Amazon rainforest is so important to the planet. Should we be managing that as a planet? But it's kind of in Brazil. Should we sort of be telling Brazil what they should and shouldn't do? That's an interesting kind of debate and discussion to have, and that's one that we will be having in geography. So global governance is really, really important. Antarctica is the key case study in this sort of area. And again, Antarctica is not really a place that we sort of really think about too much, but it's a massive continent and it has global importance. And it's linked again to sort of things like climate change. And if the glaciers and the ice caps and ice sheets melt in Antarctica, then what kind of influence is that going to have on the rest of the planet? Ian mentioned earlier on coasts and sea level change. So you can see now, sort of as we're moving towards the end of the 2-year period, we're starting to make connections and links between all the different units. So I'm sort of saying, look, think about the Amazon, think about sea level change in coasts. So we're making those connections, we're making kind of synoptic, what we call synoptic links right at the end. So really, really exciting unit to finish, which brings everything together really. A couple of questions kind of coming up, what GCSE grades do you need? It's a 4 in your core subjects, so of English, maths and sciences, but also 4 in geography as well. We do sort of get some students each year sort of who haven't had the chance to do GCSE geography for whatever reason. That's absolutely fine, as long as you can demonstrate that you've got a real interest and enthusiasm for the subject and you've got your 4 aboves in your key subjects, that's absolutely fine. Ian, do you want to kind of maybe
I'll pick up on one or two of these other questions as well that we've had. Thank you for these. Sort of what careers can I go into with geography? I think the question to ask is what careers can't I go into with geography? You know, clearly there are certain things that geography will help with if you're particularly interested in sort of environmental issues, if you're particularly interested in sort of planning issues, then geography is very, very relevant. But one of the things that is absolutely great about geography as an A-level is the diversity of skills that are actually embedded into the course. So by the time you've had 2 years with us, then we'll have skilled you up in terms of being able to write sort of fairly short, sharp answers. We'll have shown you so many different types of data that, you know, pretty much whether we put a map or a graph or a photograph or whatever it is in front of you, you'll be able to interpret it and make some judgments about it. And as well as that, you have to be able to construct sort of evaluative arguments in terms of writing sort of fairly focused essays. So all of those things, together with the independent investigation that you do for coursework, they skill you up so well that frankly, any employer is going to be pretty delighted to have you with those sorts of skills. So, I mean, you know, bizarrely, I went to have my eyes tested on Saturday and the optician that I met actually did a geography A-level. She'd sort of taken a photograph of my eyes and she pulled it up on the screen and she said, well, this is just like, you know, looking at the topography of an area. And it, again, is that sort of that skill of data presentation and interpretation that you wouldn't necessarily expect to have encountered there. That wasn't what I expected at all. You know, we have a former prime minister who was a geographer. So, you know, the world events, the awareness that you get from geography just makes you so employable that, you know, it's a really great A-level to have. And it just goes with anything, to be perfectly honest, really.
Yeah, I would agree with that, with Ian. I mean, employment rates coming out of university, if you've studied geography, are very, very good, very high. And they are seen as sort of, as Ian sort of says, really, really employable. We keep in touch with quite a few of our students once they leave QE, and we're always fascinated at the different jobs and experiences that they've had. And we get students that have got very specific geography related jobs, working for things like the Environmental Agency, working in hazard management, working kind of in sort of climatology, things like that. But we also have people working in finance, we have people working in marketing. So you can sort of see the sort of diverse range of jobs that geography prepares you for. We've mentioned the grades, we've covered that one. Fieldwork, I think we've covered that, but just a reminder, we do 3 days residential in the Lake District, sort of in March, and we've been going there for a number of years. We tend to kind of keep it reasonably local. Yeah, we could go off to Kenya and Iceland and places like that. We'd love to do that. But there is obviously a cost sort of implication, and it's compulsory. We do have to have everybody going on field trips, so we want to make it affordable. So that's one of the key reasons why we go to the Lake District, and we always have a great time, and the students sort of love it just as much as they would if they were going to some far-flung locations. So don't let that put you off. We have a great time in the lakes.
Whichever course, you know, wherever you end up going for A-level geography, if you decide to do it, then field work is an important part of that. And as Mark says, it's actually a sort of compulsory necessary part of the course. If you think about it, you know, you wouldn't go and do a science A level without expecting to do practicals. You wouldn't go and do a language without doing orals. You know, you wouldn't come and do geography without doing field work. So we give you quite a good preparation in the first year in terms of helping you to get to grips with the content and to skill you up for your coursework. But then actually in the second year, we have a couple more trips as well. And those are day trips. And the reason that we sort of do them the way we do is to actually help students with revision. Because clearly when it comes to your end of course exams, then you're going to be dealing with topics that, you know, maybe you haven't touched for potentially coming up to about a year or so. So what we do is we go over to Teesside for a day and we do really quite an extensive tour of the whole sort of conurbation, and we use it to look at all the different aspects of that urban geography that we covered way back and sort of bring it back to life. And then we do the same with the coasts work as well. We go up to Seaham Beach in County Durham because Seaham Beach has got cliffs and sort of a shingle beach heading down to bits of wave cut platform. So it's got quite a lot of erosional features. But then after lunch, we come back down to Seaton Carew, which is really quite a contrasting beach, which is backed by sand dunes and, you know, much more sort of deposition taking place there. So we really do get the most out of the field work. And one thing to point out is that, you know, all exam boards have to, or they all say that every centre has to provide 4 days of field work, but with us, you'll get 6. So you'll actually get a little bit sort of extra from us, basically.
Yeah, sort of exam-based sort of questions and then some sort of guidance, what works well with geography. Ian and I are pretty well placed to sort of discuss kind of combinations in our previous roles. We were sort of guidance directors, principal tutors, which offered a lot of advice on this sort of thing. So we'll cover them in just a second. But yeah, in terms of exams, sort of it is 1 physical exam and 1 human exam. They're both 2.5 hours long. Combination of questions, some short answer questions, 4 markers, some 6-mark analysis questions where you're looking at data and analysing data, which we've sort of mentioned, and then some more longer based 9 markers and 20-mark essay style questions. So yeah, it's 1 physical exam and 1 human exam, and then obviously 20% of your final grade is coursework. Okay. So does geography work well with biology? What courses work well with geography? Let's have a little look at those questions. Yeah, good questions. I think sort of there are lots of sort of subjects that work well with geography. We tend to get sort of 2 sort of students, if you like, some that are kind of more scientists, more scientific in their thinking. And if that's the case, we sort of get students, or we actively encourage students to think about, yeah, possibly a science like biology, chemistry, or physics, but also geology as well. So geology is a science, and that works really, really well with geography, particularly if you're into the sort of more physical sort of side of the course. Okay, I don't know whether you want to sort of add to some of that, Ian, and maybe talk about the sort of more humanities side.
I think the thing about geography is that geography can be considered to be a social science, and so it works equally well with the humanities compared with the sciences as well. So in terms of sort of economic inequality, social segregation, you know, you've got your economics, your business, your sociology, your psychology are all subjects that will go really well alongside geography. But frankly, you know, there just isn't a subject that doesn't go well with geography. I mean, I think we would always say that in terms of choosing your A-level subjects, the advice that we would give you is to think about things that you've been fairly successful at in the past and things that you think you're going to enjoy. And if you can get those 2 things to overlap, then frankly, you know, that's really sort of what you're looking for, really.
A few questions about sort of grades and how successful we are in geography. Yeah, I would say we're really successful. We've generally sort of had 100% pass rate over the last sort of few years with the new exam specification.
I think we've had what 5 A stars this last year, about 10 or 11 A's. You know, a very, very large number of B's, and then some C's, some D's. But of course, you know, you've got to remember that it's all about the individual, and it's about people being able to sort of achieve their target grades and to be able to move on to university. And the students who work with us are successful in doing that.
Yeah, so yeah, I'd say kind of, if you come into us, sort of feel confident that sort of you're going to get a good experience and hopefully get a good grade. If you attend, you do your homeworks, and you keep kind of sort of trying and working as hard as you can, then you will be a successful individual. Okay, you might not necessarily get an A star or an A, but you're gonna, as Ian says, get the grade that you're more than capable of, and hopefully sort of sort of exceed those kind of target grades that you've maybe been set by the college or yourself. Okay.
We always get some questions like this one here about how many people are in each group, which is an understandable question. And basically, I mean, one of the things that I quite like about teaching geography at QE is that we have in our first year probably about sort of maybe 16, 17, 18, 19 students in a class. It varies from one block to another. You know, I've been in places where I've taught really small groups before, and you might think, oh, that would be fantastic because you'll get so much more individual attention. But actually, it doesn't work well in terms of group discussion, of hearing sort of different opinions, you know, bouncing ideas off each other, working together in groups on field work, in data collection tasks and things like that. So we've always found at QE that our classes are big enough to work well and to have a good sort of group dynamic and hear the contributions, but also they're small enough that we can get any sort of individual attention to people that we need to give them, you know. And it's always the case that if there's anything you want support with, then you just ask us, you can get in touch with us, you know, and we will absolutely help you.
The exam board that we use is AQA. Sort of obviously that might be sort of different to the exam board that you've maybe done at GCSE. We do start off from scratch basically, and assume sort of a sort of no knowledge almost, so that we can kind of bring everybody up to speed. And as I said earlier on, I think sort of the course is a good one. It's very contemporary. There are some things on there that are brand new and sort of things that you haven't done before, but there's some stuff on there that you've actually done some way back in from year 7, like your hazards. So there's a nice balance between familiar and new stuff. So yeah, AQA is the board that
and I think the thing as well about doing AQA is that it's a big exam board, and so there's quite a lot of support material out there. So for example, you know, we have sets of textbooks that we use in lessons, and you would be issued with your own textbook to have at home as well if you wanted to have that. Not that we are textbook teachers at all. We're very much into producing our own resources and to doing things sort of differently, but the textbook is there as a support for you. And of course, there are things like revision guides and other booklets that go with that will help you. But certainly with our sort of in-house resources, our own in-house website that we use, plus Google Classroom, then, you know, there's sort of quite a lot of information there that will be relevant to you. It doesn't necessarily matter, you know, would an AQA GCSE in geography help? A GCSE geography course will help. It doesn't particularly matter which board it is. As Mark says, you know, we sort of start from scratch. You know, we're very happy to welcome people from all backgrounds, you know, no matter which school or board you've had in the past. So you'd be absolutely fine with that.
Yeah, I would say kind of sort of just keeping an eye on time and such like, but sort of some things kind of coming into my mind. Sort of you guys are sort of thinking about what subjects that you might want to do at QE or after your GCSEs. And I think sort of really kind of dig deep, have a look at our website, sort of, so you've been on the website, sort of have a little look at the subject website, and have a little look and compare and contrast that with other subjects, and sort of at this moment in time, don't necessarily have 3 subjects that you really sort of set your mind on. You've got plenty of time to make your mind up. You don't have to make your final subject choices until you've actually got your GCSE results in August. So over the next sort of 2 or 3 nights, we've only got 1 night left of the virtual sort of open night, maybe investigate 6 subjects, 7 subjects, and kind of just sort of really kind of go through those websites, those subject websites, and have a really good look at them and find out what you like, what you don't like, and whether it suits your skill set, whether it does things that you're good at and that you're interested in. Final question that we've got at the moment, which was a nice one to sort of finish on, depending on your political persuasions. But the Prime Minister was Theresa May, who was the Prime Minister. Okay. So I think kind of we're pretty much done, unless everybody or anybody's got any final questions. I think sort of.
I think we'll probably be posting this so that it can be accessed. So if you weren't able to join us at the start, then don't worry about that particularly. You know, we'll make that available so that you can have a look at the things that we've been saying. But certainly, you know, I mean, I think we'd like to thank you all very much for coming along today. And if there is anything else that you would like to know, you know, or you just want to get in touch with us, then probably email is the easiest way to do that. You're absolutely welcome to email either of us directly. If you want to get in touch with me, then my email address is iperrier at qeliz.ac.uk. Very happy to have a chat with any of you that way.
Yeah, likewise. My email is mmcadam@qeliz.ac.uk. And I say I'm more than happy to answer any questions that people have about the course and any general questions about QE as well. So thank you very much for joining us, and it's been an enjoyable experience. So thanks for that.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you.
Cheers now.